Tonight, as I've been doing, I wanted to speak from Dogen's collection of koans, what we call the Mana Shobogenzo. And tonight I'm looking at case 21, which is really short, really simple. This is how it goes. Once Zen master Baoji of Panshan went to the marketplace and overheard a customer speaking to the butcher. The customer said to the butcher, "Cut a fine piece for me." The butcher threw down his knife, folded his hands, and said, "Sir, is there any piece that is not fine?" Upon hearing these words, Panshan had an awakening. That's as simple as these stories get. And this is great because whereas most of these stories involve a student going to a teacher and being kind of rebuked or having cold water thrown on them somehow, here Panshan is just overhearing a butcher. And the butcher is not offering a teaching, in my opinion. The butcher is not trying to stand in some wise position. The customer says, "Cut a fine piece for me." And the butcher is maybe teasing, or maybe he's being sarcastic, or maybe he's being defensive about what he's selling. But he says, "Sir, is there any piece that is not fine?" And Panshan, who is over here, hears this, and he understands something he didn't understand. He sees something that he didn't see, which is how all the other stories go when it's between teacher and student. It doesn't need to take place in that context, just as this teaching doesn't need to come from Zen at all. It doesn't need to come from Buddhism at all. We don't need this tradition to arrive at this. And yet, and we've talked about this so many times, it runs counter to absolutely everything that is normal about how we understand the world. And so whether it comes from the tradition or it comes from a butcher or it comes from something else, we need it. We need to hear this. Here it comes in the form of a butcher saying, "Is there anything that's not fine? Is there any piece of meat that is not fine?" The more famous version of this comes from a teacher named Seng Zan, who said, "The great way is not difficult for those who hold no preferences." And we hear that. I hear that. When I first heard that, my first thought was, "Oh yeah, that sounds right." And my second thought was, that's like saying that the great way is not difficult for people who don't need to breathe. Because when do we have no preferences? We have to search. Preferences guide everything for us. Preferences not just inform what we do and how we do it, they're at the core of our understanding of who we are, of our identity. We distinguish ourselves from other people because we like this. We like this music, and those people like that music. And so we're different, and so the world is interesting. And in that way, you can know who I am and I can know who you are. It matters. It feels like it matters. And occasionally, we encounter this question of preferences in the same way as the person in the marketplace. We get to choose between two things. We weigh them and we say, this one is better for me than this one. This one serves my purposes better than this one. This one is prettier than this one. But that's maybe 1%, maybe less than 1%. Because most of what we do when we work within the world of preferences is we work against the thing in our minds. We look at our job and we say, this job is not as fulfilling as the other job, but the other job doesn't exist. It's a job that I've created or that I've heard about. We say, this marriage, it's not as reciprocal as the other marriage. And the other marriage is the one that we imagine. This life is not as rewarding as the other life. This day is not as comfortable as the other day. This weather is not as good as the other weather. And so as we get pulled into preferences, we get pulled into another reality, a reality that is entirely of our own making. And because we are who we are, we choose that one. We choose that reality over this reality. That idea over the thing that we can touch and see and smell and taste. And in this way, we get pulled away from this life and this moment and this encounter. And we do this, most of us, in as many moments as there are in the day. It's instinctive. So much so that when we read Zen stories about people for one moment not doing it, we frame it as spiritual experience. And we talk about it for 1,000 years. That someone heard a rock hit a piece of bamboo and for a moment heard only that sound without the sound of their own mind. We think, incredible. That's incredible. But it's not incredible. We have these moments. We know these times. Sometimes we trick ourselves because we're looking for those moments. So we fall down and we bruise our knee, and then when we tell the story, we say, it could have been so much worse. And in this way, instead of choosing the idea in our mind that's better, we force ourselves to choose what really happened over the thing we can imagine that would be worse. And it feels like gratitude and positive thinking, and it is. And it's also just us entertaining ourselves with options and then choosing one. Because we need a preference. We need something that's better than another thing. So whether we offer ourselves a better option or a worse one, we're doing the same thing. We're just giving ourselves a place to land. Something that feels like it's ours. And so what do we do with this? We can have this moment that Panshan had in the marketplace. We can hear this. We can hear it in a particularly receptive moment. And we can go, aha, that is it. And it can feel like an awakening. It can feel like something opens. And then what? In most cases, the what is we have that opening and then we think, I choose this way of seeing things. Because this way of seeing things seems better than another way of seeing things. And it's lost just as quickly as it arrived. Like so many things in this tradition, it's simple, but it's hard. And I don't want to pretend otherwise. I don't want to say that this is something that we just turn on or turn off. But I think there's a conversation to be had. And I want to offer it in two ways. One is that this can come to us organically, beyond those single moments of experience. It can come to us as something we begin to rest in the same way that most of what happens from these teachings comes to us organically, which is through a process of maturity. And the way that we mature, in most cases, comes through experiences of loss. We learn through big experiences and small that our preferences don't mean as much as we thought they did. By which I mean they aren't shaping the world. They're just shaping how we feel about it. And that happens as we get older. And it happens as we lose people. And it happens as we lose abilities. I'm not as spry as I would like to be. Not as spry as the person in my head. I'm not as resilient as the person in my head. And when I was younger, the person in my head still existed for me out there. I was moving toward the person who was more spry and more resilient. And now I'm not. And in the loss of that sense of what could be, can come just a hint of ease with what is. Where I start to see that all of my own talking to myself about what I wish I could be is just exhausting. It doesn't seem to move any pieces. It doesn't seem to help. And so, in this way that I didn't choose, there can be a letting go. That's one. The other way that we work through this is through a stance of curiosity. You can notice this in anything, but let's take the example of Zazen. Tonight, as you sat, you may have had an opinion about how you were sitting. If you were one of the very, very lucky few, it felt so good. And every breath felt so deep, and your mind felt so clear, and your posture was so straight. And you thought to yourself, this is how I want it to be. This is my preference. This is great. And if you were like the rest of us, you felt like, oh, this is, it's okay. It's not great. My breathing is not, why is it not so deep? Why is it not free the way it was that one time? Why do I have this pain between my shoulders? Why does my leg shake? I don't choose this one. I choose the other one. This is how most of us sit. But there is another way, which is to take up this posture and put our hands like this and put our eyes like this, and then become interested in it. So that when we breathe out, we allow ourselves to be fascinated by what it feels like to breathe out. And then we breathe in, and we can be so curious about what it feels like to breathe in. And when our back refuses to be straight, instead of choosing that it should be something else, we meet it with a kind of wonder, and we think, I wonder why not? I wonder why it feels like this. And we notice the little muscles and the little twitches and the pains. And in this way, we pass 10 seconds or 10 minutes or 30 minutes without wanting it to be something else. Not because we think this is the best way, not because this is our favorite way or the way we would design, but because we're not pushing it and we're not pulling it. We're just getting close to it as it is. That's what it is to bring effort to practice. That's what it is to bring energy to practice. It's that tiny pivot of looking at what we're doing or looking at what is in front of us, looking at the palm of our hand or a tree or our marriage or our job or our life and thinking, huh, look at that. And when we do that, we step away, even if just for a moment, from this idea that there is a better cut of meat. That there is a way it should be or a way it could be, or that it could have been worse. Because it is what it is, and what it is matters to us. Again, not because it's right, but because it's right there. And so I'll just end with that. That tomorrow morning, if you come to this, if you sit, or if you don't, and what you're doing is walking, or what you're doing is talking, or what you're doing is eating a bowl of cereal, that you can meet that with wonder. Not because it will reveal some great cosmic truth, but it will allow you to get out of the way of what's just there. And that's worth investigating. And that's where I'll stop.